Joining me now, live in Cairo, our man in the Middle East, Ed Yeranian, senior correspondent, CBS Radio News veteran, Voice of America. Ed, great to have you with us.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure.
Ed, in Iran last night, protesters in various cities protesting the Iranian government and specifically protesting a huge spike in gasoline prices. 200 protesters shot dead by the Iranian authorities. I don't see it in a headline anywhere. What am I missing here?
Well, John, this has been taking place gradually over the last, 15 days probably, and the Iranian government cut the internet, although it's back apparently online, much of it at least. So they're connected to the worldwide grid. But that being said, a lot of the news coming out is, how should we put it? People are afraid to take videos, afraid to post them, and they've arrested, according to Iranian legislators themselves in parliament, at least 7,000 people. I've seen figures much higher than that. Some are saying 12,000. The casualty figures are also disputable. Some sources are saying up to people. Gave a much higher number than that. I think he was just saying basically that the regime is in trouble. I don't think anyone really knows how many people were killed, though.
I mean, 200 protesters last night shot dead. The government takes out guns and just guns them down in the road, right? Takes their bodies away and dumps them in a pit. What am I missing? Help our audience understand why this isn't on the front page of every paper today. Why it's not on CNN. Yeah. I've gone through every major site. Every single headline is impeachment or another trade war that Trump is starting by putting tariffs on France because they're screwing our internet companies and dumping steel again, right? And getting around the quotas and cheating. And so he's going to tariff them. I can't find this story. You know where I found it? Al Jazeera, of all places, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the Arab news channels are covering it. Jazeera, actually, the Arabic Jazeera has a correspondent in Tehran. He's very careful about what he says, but they get more out than U.S. networks. U.S. networks have no one in Tehran. But the 200 casualties that have been named by Amnesty International took place over a period of time, not just over one day. And it didn't hit the UN because Russia and China won't let it come up at the Security Council since they're allies of Tehran. I think we do that for Israel as well. So, I guess what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. But anyway, there are a lot of protests going on right now, which are linked to Iran, actually, in Lebanon, in Iraq, various places in Iraq. And I think those Iraqi protests have been encouraging the Iranians in some ways. But those are not getting very good coverage in Western media either.
Well, Edward, if these protests, if these shootings were in any other country except Iran, I'm telling you, whether we have somebody there or not, the wires would cover them. I'm telling you, though, they're not covering them because U.S. media protects Iran because Trump pulled out of the Iranian deal. I mean, it is plain as a nose on your face. This is why we complain in this country about the unbelievable fake news bias that goes on. I mean, you can't even get facts out now because it's all about their narrative. And today their narrative is two things. Trump's going to get impeached, Jerry Nadler's clown car show coming up in Washington, D.C., and Trump puts tariffs on our allies, France, Argentina, and Brazil. That's all they want to talk about. If it's not anti-Trump, they don't even run the story. I mean, it's becoming like this sick obsession that our media has. I want to get off it because I got other things to talk about. Ed, let's get to Syria. Let's see, we pulled back for a month. The administrative state in Washington, D.C. ran around with their hair on fire and said we abandoned the Kurds and everybody was going to die. What's happened so far?
Yes, John, just like you say, I mean, the bark and Q media has their narrative of the day, and they bark and bark and bark and bark, and oftentimes it's just an agenda rather than what's really happening or the top story or what the people really should know. But anyway, well, as you said, let's not harp on that subject too much. Syria, the situation in Syria, in the north of Syria, is prickly. This morning they said 30 people were killed from airstrikes. I guess they mean from the government and the Russian airstrikes as well. So the Turkish offensive into the north of Syria is bogged down. They're not really getting anywhere, but they've caused a lot of casualties. And I think that the Russians and the Syrian government have foiled the Turkish incursion into Syria, northern Syria, and eventually they will probably just pull out. But I don't think Erdogan is going to let it sit that long. I mean, he's going to stay for a while. As far as President Trump pulling out, I think it probably was the right thing to do because we didn't want to get caught in the crossfire, and the Turkish president was pretty dead set on doing what he was going to do, and he's been very vitriolic about the West in general. He said over this NATO meeting that's taking place right now, he said that if the West did not say that Turkey was, or the NATO countries did not back Turkey up for allegedly fighting terrorists in Syria, that he wouldn't back them up for the defense of Baltic states. Now, that's blackmail. Maybe it's time for for Turkey to leave NATO.
Well, you know what? That's another discussion for another day. The Syrian situation, right now, the president's strategy has been pretty successful. There's not this mad bloodshed of Kurds that everybody was talking about. There's not all these ISIS fighters that were let out of prison that Lindsey Graham was talking about. None of this has happened. And like you say, I mean, the Turks have done a pretty good job in doing what they said they were going to do so far. Now, things could change, and we have assets in the area, but we'll see how it goes. Meantime, this president continuing to defy the State Department, traditional careerist in the administrative state, as he tries to dismantle our military policing network around the globe, which is costing these people, Edward, a lot of money. I mean, you and I are in media, but you ever meet these defense contractors? Everyone that I've ever met's a millionaire. I don't know. Every single one. It's like all you have to do is start a defense contracting business, get one contract with the Department of Defense or the Army or the Navy or the Marines or something, and you become a millionaire, and then you sell your company for hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, that's like all you have to do. That is the new path to U.S. prosperity. Just be a defense contractor, right? These people, this gravy train they've had of supplying these endless wars, Trump is threatening it. That's why they're going berserk.
Well, he's been very successful so far in what's been happening in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran in terms of the protests. People are protesting. The Iranian economy is going down the tubes. That's causing pain in Iraq and Lebanon and Syria. The Syrian pound has hit new lows within the last 3 days. It looks like that's tied to both the protests in Iraq and in Lebanon, as well as to Iran not having a lot of cash to give the Syrian government. So President Trump's strategy seems to be paying off. Where will this eventually morph? I'm not sure. What will the media be saying? Well, as Ronald Reagan put it, when you see something in the media, trust but verify, as he said with the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Trust but verify. Edward Yeranian with us. He's live in Cairo, Egypt. Edward, good to have you with us. Edward, also a veteran correspondent at CBS News, a longtime member of the U.S. Voice of America. Edward, I want to move on to the President's Summit, the NATO Summit in the United Kingdom. What do you see coming out of this, Edward?
Well, I think relations between the President and NATO are on tenterhooks, and the NATO countries, especially France and Britain, would like to see more U.S. involvement and more U.S. money because they rely on that to a certain extent. And I think the president has been getting into a bit of a quarrel with the French president, Macron, because never mind the French cheese and the U.S. internet tax that the French are trying to put on U.S. internet companies. But Macron is like a rising star in the European Union. I think a lot of Europeans that are globalists would like to see him as the president of the European Union when they get to that point. If they get to that point, I think the president would not like it to see it come to that point because he's not a globalist, and they're trying to. A lot of people are trying to squash, like George Soros, are trying to squash the Brexit. So that doesn't happen. And George Soros, in an interview, said
what?
Soviet Union. That's very telling that he said that.
Well, yes, very telling. And Trump at NATO, the great disruptor. And, I was looking at some facts the other day that by 2024, the European countries' NATO spending, by 2024, 17 of the countries will be putting in what they themselves agreed to put in and promised to put in by 2024. It's about 10 now. When Trump took over, only 3 countries were putting in the share that they themselves agreed to, 3, he's up to 10, and they have commitments that by 2023, the beginning of 2024, 17 of the NATO allies will be contributing their fair share, which has revitalized NATO monetarily, and it's put them in a position where they can get better supplies, better equipment, etc., and taking the burden off the U.S. But again, nobody will talk about that, right? Remember when the president first went there and complained about it, and everybody was saying, oh my God, he's being mean to our allies. Meantime, U.S. taxpayers picking up the entire tab, and this president trying to stop that. You haven't heard anything about that either, have you?
No, John. A lot of things that we as journalists see and know about that you don't hear in the mainstream media because they're not part of their agenda. I think you can see their agenda if you watch these things day in and day out. You can see what their agenda is. But I mean, our pointing that out doesn't always have a useful effect because they just fight back and say, no, we're not doing that. And then they lie about something else. And, you get nowhere. So really, I guess the point is that the president has been trucking through with his agenda, which is an anti-globalist agenda, and I think that makes them angry. And a lot of the media are globalist-oriented, belong to people who support globalism, and they're the ones who have been criticizing him the loudest. And a lot of their anger and wrath has been due to the fact that they want to see their globalist agenda put through, and he's been disrupting their globalist agenda.
That is why we elected him, to disrupt the globalist agenda. This is what the left in this country and the liberals and the Democrats and the Trump haters and the never Trumpers, this is what they don't understand. I mean, they complain about what he's doing. What they don't grasp, Edward, is what you just said is why he got 63 million votes and got elected in an electoral college landslide. People were sick and tired of being kicked around, taken advantage of, and screwed by the globalist supply chain endless war network across the globe, and especially in Europe and China. And so Trump promised to come in and hit it with a 2x4. That's what he's done. That's why they're impeaching him, or they're attempting to. They don't understand this is why he got elected. And I'm telling you, Edward, it's why he's going to win again, only bigger. They just don't get it. Thanks, Ed. John Fredericks Radio Network.